Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
In this review, we'll show you how to save a Cobra, Mustang that is. It covers the vintage Cobra Street Machine Kit. It's a 125 scale kit from Revell, number 7114. Now occasionally, you'll see a model that just catches your eye and you think, that'd be a great build. And you're surprised by the price being much less than you expected, but you have to wonder what's wrong with it. Well, I saw this one online and I really liked the integrated body side rear spoiler, the blacked out headlight buckets, and the wheel covers. And right away I thought, hey, I could make something special from this kit. Well, they seem to be a unique look. So when I got the kit, I discovered it had no decals, of course. And I also found out it didn't have a motor either. Turns out that this is what's called a rescue kit. Without some extra work, it would have been tossed out by most people. So with a little help from a parts pack motor, some homemade decals, and a little scratch building, I was happy with the outcome, and I'll show you how I did it. Now this was one of the models issued through a collaboration between Revell and Hot Rod Magazine back in 1985. And you can still find them online at auction sites. It was first issued as the Monroe Handler in '77 and later as the California Cobra kit. It has 86 parts molded in red with chrome-plated parts and a clear window, along with two-piece hard vinyl tires, decals, and instructions. And when you're done, it's about 6.5 inches long, 3 inches wide, and 2¼ inches high. Just a second, folks. I think that's Newt trying to chime in. So, Newt, do you like working from home because of that stay-at-home order?
Well, yes and no. It's harder to keep you from messing things up when I can't see over your shoulder, but it is less stressful.
Well, I'll try to be extra careful. How's that sound?
We'll see how it goes. I do have a question. Since you're trying to make the model look like the pace car, why didn't you use the '77 convertible?
You know, that's a really good question. As it turns out, 1976 was the last year that American automakers built convertibles. They just stopped making them. So in '77 there weren't any for the model makers to copy. And the big three didn't start making convertibles again until 1986. As you see this old monogram kit, this was the look that I was going for. I wanted to give it the 64.5 Mustang vibe from actually the first Mustang ever seen on the track. And kind of give it a retro look into the 70s and still retain some of that mid-70s vibe. Here are the contents of the kit as I received it. As you can see, there's no sprue for motor parts, but you could consider that being like some of the new kits from Japan. Anyway, please be sure to use the safety and use guidelines of the manufacturers of any of the products you see here or here in the review. And we'll be using mostly liquid cement, but sometimes super glue for strength and white or clear glue for the window glass. And so here's the motor that I assembled to put into the kit, and I know what you're thinking. How do you get a 427 into that little Mustang? Well, it turns out that it's actually possible. I also had to modify things just a little bit from the parts pack motor to get it to work with the street version here. So here are the parts that I've decided to use for the kit. I decided to use different headers. Also, I needed to strip the chrome off of many of the pieces there, except for the ones in the upper right. I left those pieces as chrome parts. One of the first things that I noticed was that I wouldn't be able to use the kit supplied chrome headers there. They're more or less made for like a top fuel dragster or a funny car. So I went into my parts bin and I found an appropriately shaped header and I went to assemble those. And the first thing I did was to place a strip of exhaust port gasket on the ends there to keep everything together. And then I had to fill some sink marks that were on the exhaust ports. I gave these parts a little wash so that you could see the detail in this kit. The crankshaft is there, visible on the bottom side of the block, and even the pistons are at different heights inside the cylinders. The carburetors come in two pieces. You have to assemble the two halves together and then kind of clean them up a little bit. We'll also be using these other parts for the front end and starter and the solenoid, etc. As you can see, the pieces have been painted. We used a little Ford Motor Blue for the block, some steel for the transmission, and the rest of the pieces will assemble quite easily. The front of the motor is in place here, along with the manifold on top, which was also painted in aluminum color. The transmission was added to the back end along with the bell housing there and the chrome oil pan. We also decided to not use the kit supplied distributor and went with a pre-wired unit from Parts by Parks. They make a pretty good product. I prepped the engine block by using a small pin vise to drill some spark plug holes into the cylinder there. The big quads have been assembled and cleaned up, and we're going to paint those gold. We're going to mount them on some toothpicks to get a good clean paint job on them. Now install the carbs to the top of the motor. Tape off any chrome anywhere you find it to make sure you get a good bond, and assemble the air cleaner now and test fit to make sure that the carbs fit into the openings. Super glue the distributor into place and go ahead and add the air cleaner on top of the carbs along with the valve covers. Finish the headers in a flat white, and we're going to mock those up in a little while here, and but they won't be finally glued until near the end of the build. I used a chart I found online for the wiring sequence, and I went ahead and routed the plug wires into their locations. Now you'll also find that it's time to paint the starter black along with the front pulleys, and the fan belt is flat. Also the oil filter there you see on the right side is white with an aluminum housing. Here's a top view of the motor with the headers mocked up and in position. Now we'll turn our attention to the body, and first thing we'll do is put the fascia on, and starting in the back end there. The fascia also included some indents like where a bumper would be placed in there, but I decided to fill those in because they serve no purpose, and I thought it looked better smooth. Also, we're going to put the front end into position at this time, and we'll do that before we start cleaning the body up. As you can see here, both are in place, and we've started sanding the seams and getting everything, all the parting lines cleaned off as you normally would. Notice the T-tops too. And here's a close-up of the front end as it's in position. Also still need to clean those edges up where they don't quite fit perfectly. Here's a picture of the T-tops on each side. I decided not to leave those removable, and I'm going to glue them into place, so I mock fit those to make sure they fit. I also put the hood into position and taped it there for most of the remainder of the build. Now I turn the unit over, and notice the wheel wells in front are molded into the body. But the T-tops are going to need a little support to make sure they remain in position after they're put into place. So I cut some strips of evergreen and laid them up there as positive stops for when those are glued into place. Now you should do some test fitting to make sure that you get a good flush fit there. But as you can see, the arrows indicate from the top side where those strips are. You just place the T-tops on there to make sure that they're in good position. On the backside fascia, I filled in those indents there with some glazing compound, and you'll notice that the taillights, as they are molded into the back panel. See the ridges up there, and they really need some help. I don't know if you'll ever see this model from the backside. Nobody would show it because you either just paint that, or I'll show you how to make them look really nice. The mounting bracket and the radiator assembly there snap right into position right behind the front fascia in front of the engine compartment. And we'll mock that up and then paint that later. And now I decided to glue the outside mirrors into position. They actually fit into some little notches there pretty nicely. Now these pieces are made from the dreaded red styrene. If you know anything about painting red styrene, you'll know that it's going to bleed through if you don't put a nice opaque dark primer or paint on it. So assemble these pieces, and notice there's a white patch there in the interior, and we'll talk about that later. Now we're going to glue the two halves of the pumpkin there together with the spring and axles, and glue that into position along with the two shock absorbers that were stripped, and they're at an awfully wide angle for shocks, but we'll put them into place. Notice too that the frame is nice and square because that's going to change. And here is the spring and axle assembly in position at the back end. Here's another look at that assembly. As you can see, the spring's just attached to the bottom of the frame there, as this is upside down. We can work on the front end. That includes the big cross member, the springs that have been stripped of chrome, and the spindles. The cross member there just traps the parts into position, and then it's glued to the frame. With the chassis done, we'll work on the wheel assemblies, and here grab the tires and the wheels, the inner and outer wheels, and also you see a photo there of the wheel covers, which have one of my homemade decals on them. Now the wheels are made so that they will turn. There are some hubs here that go on to the axles, and they are just little caps that go on the inside, pointing towards the inside of the car through the backside wheel hub. I made some pentagon wheel stars for the wheel covers. I just thought it was a good looking design and would complement the blue stripe. So I placed those on the wheel covers, which were painted body color white, and assembled the rest of the tires. Next, you can glue the wheels into position. Just use some glue on the end of the red inserts there to make sure that if you want them to still turn, they will. And in front, don't forget those calipers with the brakes. On the bottom side, you'll see the copyright script here in front of the fuel tank. You'll also notice there's some pretty good size ejector pin marks here. If you want to make this into a contest model, you'll need to remove the script and address those pin marks. I painted the fuel cell there, fuel tank aluminum, and then I taped it off after that was dried. And then I painted the rest of the bottom of the frame with a flat black spray. I also detailed some of the lines with a silver pencil. With the wheels in place now, we can test fit this floor pan and then look for the glue spots. Scrape off some of the paint from the underside of the floor pan and the top of the frame and glue it into position. So here you see the two halves ready to be mated together. You can use your favorite adhesive here, and I used some super glue, thin stuff, to kind of capillary action in under the frame and against the floor pan there to put it into position. I quickly ran into trouble when I discovered that the glue and the brittle and thin frame had dried and warped. So I had to remove the axle assembly from the rear, and because it was warped, I then had to replace the axle assembly on top of the springs with a piece of evergreen rod that I ran through the backing plates, and I drilled a hole through the pumpkin there to replace that rear axle. and then glue it into position on top of the springs, along with the shocks that go into the back. So you'll find there are vagaries when you're working with some of these older kits, like brittle and fragile plastic. And so now we'll return to the body and some of the interior pieces. And once again, of course, they were painted flat black, but after that dries, we're going to give it a good coat of medium gray to look for any imperfections. And here's what the body looks like now that it's been protected against that red plastic bleed through. The primer dry, it's time to finish sanding those indents in the back with another coat of glazing putty and sanding that smooth to prepare that section to remove that feature. As I mentioned, I wanted to retain some of the styling cues from this kit, and the T-tops that you'll see here are a convention of the fact that they didn't make convertibles, so to get that open air feeling, they put in these little T-tops for people, which seemed to feel that was enough fresh air going that fast. I wanted to retain some of the styling cues of this kit, so I also included the louvers that go over the rear windows. With the hood taped back into position, the car was given several light coats of gloss white paint. Here's a photo of some of the homemade decals that I made. I wanted to replicate that 64.5 Mustang. And back then, the Mustang was such a new idea for Ford for their stodgy image. They had to actually tell people what it was and who it was by with big signs on the doors. But there's also, as you see here, some decals that will be used for, once again, the wheels. We did that earlier, but also the rear tail lights. Now we'll start doing some of the exterior detailing with some bare metal foil. It's just like a shiny tape. You just tape it on and trim off the excess to give your metal trim a chrome look. Here you see the windshield wipers have been covered with the chrome, and we'll trim off the excess there. Now all the chrome trim's been done, and I decided to revise the taillights to be more accurate, and also added some Cobra decals for the kit. If you've got an inkjet printer, you can merely print these out onto photo paper and give them a coat of clear, and then you can use any image that you can find for your own personal use, of course, to apply to your model, just like these. You can see also there's some reflective tape from kids' stickers that were used for the side marker lights to make this car more street worthy. So here's a couple of decal tricks. To get your stripe straight and over louvers, simply lay it in there, add a little looseness in between them, and then after it dries, cut them, and then use some setting solution to wrap them around the bottom. Also, these tail lights would not have looked correct unless something like this was done to them. They were covered with some bare metal foil for reflectivity, and then the decals were printed on clear paper and sized to perfectly match the normal indents there and trim of the tail lights, so that the exterior trim is chrome just like real, and yet you get a reflective feature through the clear decals. I painted the roof and the pillars inside the vehicle with some flat black paint to kind of cover up the strips that I used to keep the T-tops in position. I used some craft paint mixed with some soft soap and a little water to make those headlight buckets black, and then of course just wiped off the excess around the edge. But on the inside, I used some regular detailing flat black paint for the grille, and I painted the turn signal lights there, first with some silver and then with some transparent turn signal amber. Side door panels are sporting those big banners to tell you it's a Mustang. Also notice there's some louvers. I just used some small thin lines for the louvers in the back of that pan to accentuate them. I scraped off the chrome from the back of the headlight lenses and I did the same thing for the bottom of the buckets there and get those ready to glue those into position. I painted the Cobra emblem in the middle of the grill with some red paint, just like the box art showed. Now I turned the car over after everything was dried and installed the windows into position. I taped them into place and then used some epoxy around the edge to keep them in place. The interior ranged from a nicely detailed dash to a poorly detailed interior. The spare tire cover, which was located in the center of the back of the hatch there, should have been moved over to the right, but also there was no handles, door handles, switches, or anything, and the center console contained a replica of a fire extinguisher that was too small and a parking brake that was too large. So I cut the wheel out of the back end there. You can do this with a hobby blade backside and just scribe it out, or use a rotary tool with a cutter to remove it. You see here, it has been taken out of the back panel there, and then I put it on a belt grinder and sanded away all the bottom area that you see indicated by the white arrow. Next, I replaced the back deck there with a piece of evergreen panel, and then I puttied the edges of it to give it a nice smooth contour look. Assemble the two halves of the Recaro seats there, and well, they look like a concrete bench to me, but apparently that was a big upgrade back in the mid-70s. I scratch built a couple of door handles from some evergreen strip and tube, and then the one on the left has been given a little chrome pen treatment too. I added some spruce studs to the bottom of the seats and also drilled some corresponding holes in the floor pan to receive those later. I removed the fire extinguisher and the park brake handle from the console, and I also test fit the a roll bar to make sure that it would go into position later. I covered the tire cover hole, which with the kit is supposed to be filled with a wheel cover, well actually a wheel, and that's a 3/4 inch vinyl sticker. I moved the wheel cover over to the right side, which is where it is on the real vehicles, and then I gave the interior a nice coat of gray primer. Next, I painted the interior and the dash with flat white paint, and then I taped off the sides after it was dry to preserve the white paint on the door panels. I painted the interior then with a medium blue, just like the pace car Mustang. On the right there you'll see some embossing powder that I'll use for the carpeting. Here you see the forward section was painted with some white glue, and then the embossing powder is poured on it. I'll do the section around the spare tire cover there in just a minute. The rest of the flooring has been done now, and you can see some window switches here on that green tape that I made from a few pieces of evergreen strip. Also, the door handles are dry, and they'll be applied to the side panels, as you see here, with the electric window switch just in front of that. Next, I added the seats to the body pan there that were painted flat white also, and also the speakers in the back were painted with medium black. We'll continue our detailing here by giving the center console a walnut wood type of treatment, a fake one of course, just like the real thing. And then we'll move on to continue our detailing. Adding the shifter, which the shift knob of course was painted black, and the boot, and also adding some tape seat belts there for street legality purposes. So I placed the Cobra decal that goes on the tire cover there on another white vinyl sticker and applied that to the spare tire cover in the rear. Unfortunately, you won't see it unless you look closely because it's going to be covered by a louvered window. And here you see the scratch-built handbrake that I made, and the hole drilled to receive that So we'll finish that off later and put it into place. The dashboard was masked off to keep the lower portion white like the 64.5 Mustang, and then the top portion was sprayed with the same interior color. The gold item there, that is a CB radio. So our 10.4 is to move along here. After you see the gauges were added, those are just decal kit gauges, and then given a gloss coat and ready to install. So we put the dashboard into place there, as you can see, and there's some tabs on the side walls that they fit through. So just like with chrome, scrape off any paint you need to get a good bond and put that into place. And you also you see the roll bar has been installed onto the floor and against the back post there. And so the steering wheel also painted flat black, and chrome spokes with some drilled out center holes along those spokes for the finishing touches on the interior. So with this top view, you can see that we're ready to install the wheel covers, and those will be glued into position at this time. And I think they give it a unique appearance. Once again, include that 70s vibe. So here's the reason we wait for a model like this to fit an aftermarket motor in, because, well, it doesn't fit. So what I did was remove the cross members there, and we will be modifying those in such a way that will permit the engine to look natural. Scrounged up an electric fan and shroud from my parts bin and painted the engine bay black, and we'll do some more detailing in there, but this will give it authenticity. The engine came with a cooling reservoir, which I didn't use. I simply replaced that with a radiator hose, as you'll see later. I mocked up the transmission mount, and also I knew that I had to extend the center cross member there by adding 1/8-inch risers, so it was actually a little lower underneath the oil pan of the motor. Now you can glue your engine into position on the transmission mount, and then glue the transmission mount back down, and it fits right in there, so center it up with the center of the fan. And then you see here the radiator hose that was made from a piece of solder added to the top of the radiator there. The exhausts were stripped of chrome just like the other parts. By the way, you can use a bleach bath, or you can spray it into a closed container with a little easy off oven spray. And then the parts they fit pretty well, but they needed to be trimmed on the front end there, so that the front end of the exhaust pipes fit right into the headers as they protruded underneath and over the transmission mount. Then the side tips were added, part of the original kit, to continue with that styling theme. There you have it. You're finished. And with an impressive looking rake there, this mean machine looks like she's ready to take on all comers. And with a 427 Ford block, a big block in there, I think she'd do a fine job against any competition. But the main theme here is you can repair and rescue some of these great looking models if you just take a little initiative and a hard look at what you really need, and then go about either finding replacement parts like the decals, or even sources from other kits, and a little bit of scratch building. The tail lights were a challenge, and I finally figured out how to do that just by using some transparent, clear decals over some foil. So there isn't anything really that you can't fix unless there's major pieces missing, in which case you probably have to source like another body or something. But there you have it. So we hope you like this premium step-by-step scale model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but you can see us on Facebook or at our website, rideonreplicas.com. Thanks.